I am pleased again to be speaking to the authority on geoengineering, not chemtrails. I'll explain this very quickly. I want to jump into it. We're going to talk about the ABCDarian, the basics, the elements, the rudiments of one of the most important issues. Dane Wigington, thank you again, my friend.
Thank you for giving this issue a voice, Lionel.
No. I have done. You are, in case somebody is listening for the first time or watching, you are the man. Nobody, start with you. I'm telling everybody, start with you. Very, very quickly, the name of your organization, let's get this right off the bat, and how people can contact you.
GeoEngineeringWatch.org. And for the record, this is a job I never wanted. I'm not politically oriented, never been an activist, but given my background in the solar industry for Bechtel Power, a large off-grid home with all three major forms of renewable wind, solar, and hydro, when I became aware of this issue, Lionel, I just simply couldn't look the other way. In the last 15 years of my life, I've been slogging forward in this battle to expose this.
Now, let's do this. First of all, what are they spraying? Preface. I don't know anything about planes and exhaust, Dane, but I do know condensation. I do know there's, and then it blows away, and it's, water vapor in different temperatures, and I've seen pictures of the B-52s in World War II with the streaks, and I know crop dusting. I've seen this. I'll be 61, so I've kind of seen this. But please help me with this. When I see high altitude planes this weekend not over New Jersey, but over the Northeast, I saw the strangest ribbon-like streams. There were 3 planes. I almost wanted to pull over and get people's attention to just say, look up. And I see, Dane, this hazy, gauzy, thick, rope-like vapor trail, smoke, whatever you want to call it, and it spreads like a gauze. And the blue sky turns hazy. 3 of them. Now, in my simple mind, that's not water vapor. Water vapor, condensation trails, contrails, does not spread and stay for hours, blanketing the sky with this gauze. What the hell is it they're spraying? First question.
What you're describing is exactly what the intended objective is with solar radiation management. You're exactly correct in concluding that water vapor does not behave in this manner. Let's start with the condensation trail lie, perhaps the greatest lie ever perpetrated on populations around the planet. This is not condensation. And we look at the older military jet aircraft, they were not equipped with the engine that modern aircraft are equipped with. All commercial carriers and all military tankers are equipped now with what is classified as a high bypass turbofan jet engine. That's a jet-powered fan. 85 to 90% of the air that moves through that engine is non-combustive. That engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under the rarest and most extreme circumstances. So I would invite your listeners to consider that when they see researchers, for example, in Antarctica, whose breath condenses, do they see giant clouds hanging over those researchers from that moisture hanging around for hours and hours? That's not the case. Condensation does not behave in that manner. Particulate dispersions do behave in that manner. For any who've seen an air show and they see the trails of any color that they choose dispersed behind aircraft that remain in the sky, that's because that's a particulate. And that's exactly what we have being dispersed from these aircraft, Lionel, are particulates. We have up-close photographs of the retrofit nozzles mounted on the pylons just above the engine jet stream to make this appear like, quote, condensation. We have up-close film footage, multiple clips of these aircraft spraying at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. You can't turn a condensation trail on and off. This is not condensation, period, end of story. We have lab tests from the ground to confirm the same elements named in climate engineering patents. Back to your original question, what are they spraying? Aluminum, barium, strontium, polymer fibers that are used to help keep these particulates aloft longer. There is no regard for the human health impacts on the ground, environmental impacts, impacts to the ozone layer, impacts to the hydrological cycle. This is quite simply the pharmaceutical industrial approach for planet Earth with no regard for the consequences.
Okay, stop. Now, you've been doing this forever. You know this inside and out. I'm just a layman. I'm just a simple man, Dane. I'm just a simple man. I don't know what the hell you just said. But let me go back to this. Is it ever, I've seen, and I'm going to go back to this, because everybody's a plane expert, Dane. They know their planes. Sometimes I'll see something real high up, and I'll see a little tiny, it looks like a little tiny contrail, but that's it. It doesn't go any further than this. So sometimes you'll see a little something. Let me just clarify this. It's not that you will never see any trail vapor ever under any circumstance. We're not saying that, correct?
Not never, but even the short, bright dispersions. We have also another aspect of climate engineering that involves fuel additives, which create the particulate, but in a much more consistent fashion, like what you described. So even then, even the short, bright trails, in most cases, are still a form of particulate dispersion, but not a payload dispersion, a fuel additive. And that's another aspect of climate engineering. And again, even in those cases, unless you were in a polar region, right, with extraordinarily cold circumstances, still likely seeing a form of climate engineering that involves fuel additives and not sprayed payload dispersions.
So going back to square one, if you see anything, especially from a high, anything, chances are it is not some type of condensation. It is a particulate, meaning particles, elements, substances, chemicals. I want to get to this in a moment. It is something being put out. That's number one. So if you can see it, it's something.
In almost all cases.
Okay, good. Step one. Number two, we don't call it chemtrails, do we, Dane? Why is that, sir?
Semantics are extraordinarily important in the effort to expose this most critical issue. We're playing chess. We need to learn to play it well. So if someone searches the, quote, chemtrails term, which is a non-science term, leads only to pages full of conspiracy theory and hoax, it is the instant buzzword for marginalizing this issue. So if we stick to the science terms, we stand on solid ground and we can move this issue forward, and we're not easily marginalized by sticking to the science terms: climate engineering, geoengineering, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, all terms that apply to this issue. But this most simple, straightforward, comprehensible term, climate engineering.
Okay, just a second. I'm glad, because this is, you're right, semantics are important, and I don't want to be an anti-semantic, right? Here we go. This is a... I'm reading contrails. I was trying to read before the Wikipedia, who of course are 12 children, 12-year-olds with man buns and wearing socks with Birkenstocks, are sitting in a basement clicking away. And that is, by the way, Wikipedia, pardon me. Wikipedia. This is, I read this the other day and I laughed. I was drinking something and I couldn't listen to this. This is called chemtrail conspiracy theory. They you don't see the fraudulent hoax of Christianity. What? The specious recognition of a garlic as an additive. No. They don't start off in an encyclopedia with this nonsense. But listen to this. The chemtrail conspiracy theory, Dane, is based on the erroneous belief that the long-lasting condensation trails are chemtrails consisting of chemical or biological agents left in the sky by high-flying aircraft sprayed for nefarious. I don't know why there's but who says it could be altruistic for all we know. For nefarious purposes undisclosed to the general public. Believers in the conspiracy theory say that while normal contrails dissipate relatively quickly, contrails that linger must contain additional substances. Those who subscribe to the theory speculate that the purpose of this chemical release may be solar radiation management, weather modification, psychological manipulation, human population control, or biological or chemical welfare, or the trails are causing respiratory illnesses and other problems. You know, it's funny, a lot of that's precisely true. So they've counted, a lot of people say that bloodletting and leeches don't work. Well, yeah. So when you hear this, and somebody goes into Wikipedia and says, aha, Wigington, I looked this up. What do you say to that?
Well, again, let's go back to the semantics aspect of this. We don't see Wikipedia addressing the geoengineering conspiracy theory, do we? Or the solar radiation management conspiracy theory. They refer to that in the text and try to brush the issue off. But again, if we're using the correct terms, let's use an example of former Arizona Senator Kelly Ward, who was labeled Chemtrails Kelly because she attended a meeting addressing citizens' concerns on this issue. Had that meeting been titled with the geoengineering term, they would have not labeled her Geoengineering Kelly or Climate Engineering Kelly, but they used the chemtrails term. So again, simply a game of chess, a matter of semantics. If we stick to the science terms, people find science data. They find academia describing exactly what we see in the skies using the exact elements we are finding in lab tests all over the globe. So we need to stand on solid ground.
Looking up Harvard's Solar Geoengineering Research Program. Geoengineering, and the point, Dane, why this is so critical, what you're saying is it puts you into the right door. Chemtrails will let you off into the fun house, into the carnival with a bunch of, but over here, give this password, this shibboleth, this slogan, this password, and you go into this one. Look at this. Geoengineering refers to a set of emerging technologies that could manipulate the environment and partially offset some of the impacts of climate change, blah, 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 solar engineering. This is Harvard's Solar Geoengineering Research Program. So when you plug in geoengineering, it's there. You were looking under the right or the wrong term. So that being that. Now, why? Why? Who are these people? Why? Let me just give you like 9 questions, because this is what I get all the time. Why are they doing it? Who's doing it? Why isn't somebody, Dane, one weatherman, somebody somewhere. Al Roker put up a thing about new clouds. Did you see this years ago? It was like, those aren't cirrus nebula. That's good. Who are these people? Why are they doing it? Why isn't the government talking about it? Why isn't Trump talking about it? Why aren't the left, the right, Ocasio-Cortez? Dane, why are people who worry about population patterns of polar bears or the snail darter? Why are people who worry about climate change and global warming not concerned with something called solar radiation management? I gave you about 9 questions. Because we don't get it. Dig in, my friend.
Let me back into this first with the final question you asked. For the environmental organizations that are behaving with unimaginable hypocrisy by not addressing this issue, their 501c3s depend on them not addressing this issue. We've gotten responses back, for example, from Sierra Club recently that they stated, quote, although part of our organization's agenda is to address air quality, unless or until the government admits to this issue, we will not have any focus on this arena. So unless the criminal admits to the crime, they won't address this issue. And that's the case across the board. You have organizations like Bill McKibben, 350.org. Who's funding that organization? The Rockefeller Foundation. We have a federal gag order on all National Weather Service and NOAA employees, and that's incredibly important to understand. There is an illegal federal gag order on all the nation's weathermen. In regard to this technology, or going back to Harvard and what they state, even though you find the science data when you search the correct terms, you still have to navigate the gauntlet of disinformation. So in the case of Harvard, Stanford, and other frontline research institutions on this issue, they are still pumping out disinformation by suggesting various forms of geoengineering that are completely implausible, if not completely impossible. For example, suggesting putting space mirrors into the sky and all sorts of preposterous uh, technological impossibilities. And somewhere in that mix, you see in their diagrams the jet aircraft spraying particles out the back, and that's the nugget that we're looking for.
Okay, let's do
right
this.
There.
Dane, I must ask you this: you're telling me that the Sierra Club, that is, last time I checked, is there to point out corporate and governmental hypocrisy, who says, well, of course the government's not going to admit that. How many times at Agent Orange did they say, all right, you're right, okay, my bad, you got us? Yeah, I mean, that to me is almost comical. But let me explain. Going back, and I'm just letting people know it's in plain sight, there are several proposed solar geoengineering technologies. These include marine cloud brightening, cirrus cloud thinning, space-based technologies, and stratospheric aerosol scattering, amongst others. Stratospheric aerosol scattering would introduce tiny reflective particles, such as sulfate aerosols of perhaps calcium carbonate, into the upper atmosphere, where they could scatter a small fraction of sunlight back into space. Is this what I, as a layman, believe, Dane, is the incremental habituation, almost the lost leader, the limited hangout, just the introduction, so you say, oh yeah, just to let people know? Or is this true, or combinations thereof?
Still a half-truth. One, there's no admittance these programs are ongoing, operational, and have been for 70 years. And two, in regard to the elements that are being used, aluminum is a primary element being used. It shows up in precipitation tests all over the globe without exception. They are no longer admitting to aluminum, although they did in the past. If your listeners search Dane, Wigington, David Keith is the world's most recognized geoengineer. He is from Harvard, in fact. And they can see a confrontation between myself and Dr. Keith at an international climate engineering conference, where Dr. Keith stated their objective of putting 10 to 20 million tons of not calcium carbonate, but aluminum nanoparticulates, stating on the record, on film, and I confronted Dr. Keith as to had any toxicological studies been done as to that objective. His initial response was, we've studied atmospheric particulates. I'm paraphrasing, there's a lot of material up there anyway, a little more won't hurt. And when I cornered Dr. Keith on the fact that that material is not aluminum, had they studied aluminum, he said, let me be more careful. We haven't studied this. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. Now, what sort of response is this from the world's most recognized geoengineer? And now they are dodging the aluminum question, pretending that they're going to use some other elements that sound more benign to the population, because obviously aluminum, study after study, has proven core causal factor for Alzheimer's. In fact, we have peer-reviewed study now to prove without aluminum in the equation, there would be, straight from the study, quote, no Alzheimer's present in the normal human lifespan of 100 years. Aluminum, the core causal factor. And now we have the bees dying from aluminum. We have peer-reviewed study to prove it. Your listeners can search bees aluminum. We have UK in the number one cause of mortality, number one in the UK, Alzheimer's and dementia. We think it's third in the US or second, but the CDC is not admitting to it. We are sucking this material in with every breath we take, Lionel. So we can debate the agendas, we can debate the objectives, but the fact that this is going on and that it amounts to not only weather warfare, but also biological warfare is absolutely indisputable.
Okay, now, the next question is, who is responsible for this? Why don't they just say, listen, the UN, the NOAA, whoever it is, this, this phony baloney, remember the global warming, and we're not going to talk about global warming, but there are people, the ICC, Americans will say, oh, okay, they won't dispute it. Who are these people? Why don't they just come out and say, by the way, you're probably wondering what these things are? Just tell us. It's the UN, it's us, it's individuals, it's private, it's the government. Who are they?
All roads lead back to the central bankers and those who control them. Those who print the money control militaries, thus they control countries. We don't have governments, or countries with governments, I should say. We have governments that own countries at this point. And it's literally a criminal cabal the extent of which is difficult to comprehend. But all roads lead back to those who print the money. In this case, with the Western power structure, the dollar as the global reserve currency has allowed this type of hegemonic power to exist and expand. If we look at this technology and the complete disinformation from places like Harvard and Stanford pretending that this technology is only emerging, that's an absolute lie. And for any who choose to investigate, even the beginning of every one of my weekly broadcasts is this film clip of then Vice President Johnson, later President Johnson, in 1962, stating like a raving lunatic on the record. You can see him on film stating it with his own words, that we had the technology then to control the world's cloud cover, and quote, this is right out of Johnson's mouth, he who controls the weather controls the world. This is in 1962. Data indicates geoengineering programs were launched immediately after World War II in 1945. In regard to the why question, the military-industrial complex looks at this scenario as a risk-to-risk scenario, the risk of doing it versus the risk of not doing it. And it's important for your listeners to understand, we were committed over 70 years ago to an experiment on the Earth's life support systems from which there is no return. The damage cannot be undone. And that's important for people to understand. So back to the why won't they admit this? Because the liability issues are absolutely incalculable and even incomprehensible. Once the populations around the globe, it's not just our government, it's others, and they are all colluding and cooperating on this issue, by the way. All the major superpowers are colluding and cooperating on this issue for their own purposes. But once the understanding that this issue has been, in fact, completely derailing weather patterns for over 7 decades, the populations around the globe will understand how they've been victimized. And I would argue, Lionel, that's the point in time when they take to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches and look for whoever's responsible. And again, that's why there will be every effort made to marginalize this issue, to mask it, to hide it, to keep it from public view until the last possible moment.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. First, one of my rules is, I always tell my friends, don't ask why. Don't ask why. Don't expect there to be some David Rockefeller memo that says, I've always wanted to change the weather. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes people will just say, you know what, let's see if we can introduce something. I view the cabal, the deep state, the banking, whoever it is, sometimes there are people who just want to see what can we learn from that. And you're right about this. If you control the weather, Dane, do I have to go back and remind people from the days of the rain dance to people praying for weather, it is something that is almost in our chromosomes, our DNA, to want to control things. That goes without saying. The liability, if somebody said, oh, it's that group, oh, so we can blame all of the colony collapse disorders of bees, and obviously I can understand the billions, trillions of dollars of damages. I can see somebody being rather loath to identify themselves. But the question is, if I'm going to spread this, if I say, okay, Wigington, I'm in your cabal, I got to keep spraying this stuff. Because last time I checked, okay, here it is, and it falls. You got to keep spraying it again, right? Doesn't stay up there forever. So what kind of a program? How long do you want me to keep doing this? For the rest of our lives? Are we going to just having planes over and over and over? Is that what kind of a system is this? I mean, doesn't it just stay there? Or must it be replenished daily? That's about 9 questions I just gave them.
Constant replenishment. So the geoengineers would have us believe that if they did this, as if they're not already, that these particulates would remain aloft for up to 2 years, and that is a blatant, glaring lie.
Yeah, that gravity thing kind of gets in the way, yeah.
Our work with a polymer chemist, he's now deceased, but we estimated descent times as quick as 12 to 24 hours, and that correlates with what we can see on film footage. These particles settle down through the atmosphere very quickly, so thus the operations must be constantly maintained. We have the climate science community telling us once you start geoengineering, you can never stop, as if that could really...
You can't because it'll lose its efficacy?
Now because the damage done and the pressure that then builds up in the climate system would create such an immense blowback if they ever stopped, that they try to convince us they can't stop. That's like telling the addict that once you start taking drugs, you need to take more and more and more, and you can never stop because the withdrawals would be too great. Now, the bottom line is, if we back up again to the why question, we have to understand that the military-industrial complex has known the impacts human activity was having on the planet going back a very, very long way. We know that now. Let's take the Bermuda Triangle, for example, Lionel. We know what created those ship sinkings and the plane downings. This is methane fields that were formerly frozen on the seabed, methane hydrate deposits that were thawing and releasing. Methane fields tend to release in entirety all at once, which aerates the water like a bottle of champagne. The ships had no buoyancy. They go straight to the bottom when these fields release. That methane migrates through the water column to the sea surface. Then it migrates into the atmosphere because methane is lighter than air. It's covering the planet like a layer of glass. Now, those releases that we've seen in the Bermuda Triangle area for decades now are happening in regions all over the globe, specifically in the polar regions.
I thought Bermuda Triangle were airplanes and planes that were lost.
Airplanes as well. So this is when the methane migrates into the air column, it actually kills a fossil fuel combustion engine. It will kill that engine, stall it. This is absolutely proven with scientific experimentation and study. In fact, Discovery Channel did a large episode on this. So it kills a prop engine as well. So it not only can sink the surface vessels, it can down the aircraft.
What about now? What about now?
Well, if you have aircraft flying as high as our aircraft fly now, you would likely have a dispersion of the methane that would not have that effect. So we're not seeing that scenario anymore. You had much lower.
I had no idea. This is amazing.
It's important that people plug all these dots together to form the picture. So when we look at methane, we have the science community again lying to us, like the IPCC, which you mentioned earlier, stating methane is 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. But that's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, methane is 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2. It is literally like covering the planet with a layer of glass. Now let's add gases like nitrous oxide. At GeoEngineeringWatch.org, we've stated for the full decade of our existence that it's not as bad as we're being told. It's exponentially worse than we're being told. And every new headline bears out what we've stated for a decade. So in regard to, for example, nitrous oxide, another greenhouse gas, which is not talked about much, nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And we just got official confirmation from official study that they admitted they have made a mistake, that the nitrous oxide levels are 1,200% higher than they thought. That's not a little miss. It's 12 times higher than they thought. What we have, back to the risk-to-risk scenario of the why are they doing this? The military-industrial complex, in the attempt to keep business as usual, in the attempt to maintain their hegemonic power, has needed to mask the true severity and immediacy of biosphere climate collapse from the population, most especially the U.S. population, which is the last potentially counterbalancing population on the planet, or counterbalancing force. So where do we have the most anomalously cooled down or less warm location on the entire planet? And I sent you maps this morning that would show this in very vivid form. We have the countries with the largest militaries, U.S. and Russia, the most consistently less warm locations on the planet, and the most consistently less warm place on the entire planet is the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48. For those that live in those areas, Lionel, it's very hard for them to imagine it could possibly be warm anywhere because it's so cold, 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 and lately wet, wet, wet where they're at, because the climate engineers need moisture for a process called chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. That's seeding the clouds with chemical ice nucleating elements that create a cold, dense layer that descends to the surface, lowers the temperature, confuses and divides the population as to the true state of the climate while the planet descends into total meltdown. So again, back to the why reason. Not only is climate modification used for weather warfare to topple nations without those nations ever even knowing they were at war, nations in the Middle East and Africa and elsewhere that then are forced to allow U.S. occupation. It's used as a weapon of war. But also it's used to confuse, divide, and thus pacify populations as to the true immediacy of what's unfolding until the last possible moment.
Well, that goes, one of my subsidiary theories is the notion of constant chaos and destabilization. It's that weird Hegelian kind of dialectic thing about always, because just like free radicals are so dangerous because they're always trying to cleave and grab something, the worst thing that military industrial complex, cabal, whoever you want to call these people, the asset stripping jackals, the worst thing that could ever happen is stability, calmness, power, strength, a sense of solemnity, purpose, cooperation. They don't want that. Anything that makes them skeptical, that makes them run to the streets, run to the religions, run to their science, just run. And let me also go back. I think we talked about this a while back. You know, Dane, you do realize that, and I'm sure you've been told this, but people have said that I'm crazy because I ask questions, that I'm a nut. I'm a conspiracy theorist. And the great Gore Vidal says, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy analyst. And that I'm some kind of a loon because I ask questions, and I'm always thinking that maybe the issue, maybe the facts that is presented by the media are not in fact true. After all, in history, where would I get that crazy idea that the media would lie? But remember the Northern California fires? I heard people who had this thing, the deep state's worst nightmare, the phone. For the first time, this thing which tracks us and monitors us provides this instant recordation device that they never thought possible, that all of a sudden is shared or whatever. And aside from the fact that there were strange lights and people were suspecting everything from directed engineering weapons, which I don't know anything about, but you and I believe last time we talked about how weather can either fuel, affect, or contribute to these fires. Am I off base with it?
No, you're on target. Let me back up to what you stated earlier in regards to the means of controlling populations by keeping them mired in struggle and chaos. Absolutely agree with you on that as well. This is where the agenda behind climate engineering needs to be remembered, that it's extremely complex. There are many, many layers to the onion, absolutely including what you have gone over. Let me give a couple of examples of that. What we can say in regard to recent hurricanes, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, Harvey, Maria, and others, what we can positively say is that those cyclones were manipulated, they were steered, they were held in place. For example, in the case of Hurricane Harvey, and I'm not asking anyone to believe anything I state, look at the data we have at GeoEngineeringWatch.org, which includes the recorded animations in real time when it was happening in Hurricane Harvey, for example, being held in place by radio frequency microwave transmissions from ground-based transmitters. You can see the actual interaction with the recordings that we have of the events taking place because we can see the signature of these radio frequency transmissions by recorded image. You can see the interaction with those transmissions and the hurricane literally holding it in place in that position. That's how, quote, forecasters, which are merely reading scripts, can know 7 days in advance if that hurricane is going to behave in exactly the manner it behaved. They're not predicting the weather, Lionel. They're reading a script. And we know that as well, by the way, because our attorneys for GeoEngineeringWatch.org, which have had to sue the U.S. Department of Commerce, the overseeing agency for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who has a federal gag order on them, we had to sue them to get our FOIAs. And in those FOIAs that we've received so far is confirmation that scripts of the weather are being handed down to the local meteorologist level because at the top, which is Raytheon, climate engineering contractor Raytheon, they are passing down the scheduled weather, and they are interested in, quote, consistency as opposed to accuracy. So that's why people think, well, the forecasters predicted this, so this must be what was supposed to happen. They're reading a script. So back to the manipulation of even cyclones wreaking havoc on U.S. populations. People would ask, well, why would our government do this to us? Now let's stop on that question for a moment. What does our government do to not just our own citizens, but our own military personnel? How many people have seen films of the soldiers sent out with a set of goggles to watch a nuclear bomb go off, all of whom died? Agent Orange, as you referred to earlier. And it's important for people to understand that our government will see the U.S. population increasingly as not just expendable, but as a liability. So back to the creating chaos part. absolutely a part of the equation at this point in time. We know they have the ability to suppress and disperse cyclones. That technology has existed for 7 decades. That's when the U.S. first started to manipulate cyclones. I encourage your listeners to look up Project Cirrus, 1947, the first hurricane manipulation experiments 72 years ago. So we're asking people to investigate, and anybody who throws out the quote conspiracy theorist term is someone who just simply doesn't want to even bother investigating the truth, let alone facing it.
Oh no! Listen. I applaud it. I remember you only take flack when you're over the target, and that is almost the seal of approval. Let's stop for 1 second. You use the word agenda. You know, the UN. Nobody really gets this because they think of UNICEF and helping kids. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, all of these weird kind of programs to get people in, to move them into cities, get them out from the woods, get them in, stack them up, have them corralled, imprisoned. It's there. What if I sat back and I said, "Hey Dane, I have a feeling that tomorrow you should short out the following stocks or whatever it is, because what if I told you that huge swaths of real estate will vanish tomorrow? Tremendous buying opportunities. What if I could tell you that what do you want, forest fires in Greece? What would you like? How about using concentrated, somebody one time said, Tesla energy around tectonic sensitive parts to create tsunamis and earthquakes? I can eliminate. We don't need no stinking bombs. We can take care of, name it. Got a problem with Iran today? Take care of it. Operation Popeye, Vietnam, cloud seeding. I don't know why sometimes I always feel like I've got to convince somebody how diabolical could be. But if I knew I could control the weather, control it, stop it, bet on it, the fact that I've even got to explain to anybody why that would be in somebody's best interest is beyond me. But it goes sometimes, I think, Dane, my problem is, and yours as well. Do you ever see people who look at you and their eyes kind of flutter and they're saying, this is too much for me. You're giving me too much. Number one, you're scaring me. Number two, I don't know what you're talking about. Number three, and this is the part that kills me. Dane, if there was something to this, we would have known about it. It'd be on CNN. Come on, Wolf Blitzer would be talking about this. What are you talking about? Why do I have got to go to GeoEngineeringWatch.org to find out about something so catastrophic, cataclysmic? This is existential. This is eschatological. This is the end of times. This is biblical in its nature. And that's what they tell me. And you know what? It kind of makes sense. I can see it. But it is that big. And it's that very reaction that protects this cabal. Does that make sense?
It is. And a lot of that is societal programming, as you know, that people, the goal stated from some of the alphabet agencies from the U.S. is that they'll know they're successful when everything the American population believes is a lie. And that's about where we're at right now. So if people don't believe what they can see with their own eyes, if they can't look up into the sky when they see a grid pattern one day and nothing the next with the same atmospheric conditions, when they see one aircraft leaving a trail from horizon to horizon next to an aircraft leaving nothing, if they can't connect those dots and with the available science literature that describes exactly what we're seeing, there's probably nothing you or I or anybody else can tell them until they're ready to wake up and face reality. Now, back to that why question and the agendas of 2021, 2030, none of those agendas mean anything on the current course because we will not be here. And that's a mathematical fact. And I realize that's alarming to people. They don't want to hear it. But the bottom line is unless we face the totality of what's unfolding and collectively bring this issue to light and to a halt, mathematically speaking, we have no chance. And let me put that into a mathematical context. We've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years. On the current rate of loss, the current trajectory, 0 hour for no wildlife left on planet Earth is 2026. GeoEngineeringWatch.org was the first major source to state the insect populations were collapsing. We stated that almost 10 years ago.
Wait a minute, 2026 is what again? Say that again slower. What is this now?
On the current rate of wildlife die-off, the current trajectory, if that rate doesn't accelerate further, 0 hour for no wildlife left on this planet is 2026. That's a statistical fact. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect every day.
Nothing.
Statistically speaking, that doesn't mean you might not have a few specimens here and there, but statistically, functional extinction would occur in 2026. Now, I want to put this into context because now we have, with each passing day, the science community beginning to confirm what we've said at GeoEngineering Watch for a decade. On the insect loss, for example, we stated almost a decade ago, 80% of terrestrial insect populations had collapsed. Now we have official confirmation from the science community that that is in fact true. If the insects die, we will not be here much longer. That's a statistical fact as well. So back to the why scenario again, the attempt to cover up the severity of what's unfolding from populations, to keep them from panicking, to keep business as usual until the last possible moment. And that is exactly what's going on, especially in the lower 48, with the engineered cool downs while the rest of the planet is literally incinerating, while we have temperatures in the last week in the Arctic Ocean near the Arctic Circle of 85 plus degrees, while it's snowing in New Mexico. This is not nature. In regard to people want to convince themselves of cyclical patterns, for example, that this is some sort of cycle. This is not a cycle. We know statistically the changes that are happening on the planet are happening at minimum, conservatively, statistically, 170 times faster than any previous paleo event. That's not nature. It's no more nature than if you threw somebody off a 100-story building and said people die. It's natural. It's not natural when you throw them off a 100-story building. So again, the risk-to-risk scenario that I described earlier, that is the military-industrial mentality, the risk of them trying to manipulate the climate to try to stay off this cataclysm a little longer, which is in fact actually further fueling the cataclysm along with contaminating everything on the planet. You have to look at this through their lens, the lens of a cancer whose only interest is to proliferate until the host dies. And that's exactly what's happening, because Lionel, how many times have you heard that question? Why would, quote, they do this to themselves? How much have they done to themselves? Let's look at the nuclear detonations. We now know of the 650 nuclear detonations that occurred on U.S. soil in Nevada. You could watch the mushroom clouds from Las Vegas. That was responsible for the eventual death of 450,000 Americans that were downwind. How many people know that? It contaminated virtually, we just got data on this, in fact. They found fallout from these detonations in life forms at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Everything on the planet was contaminated, including they at the top, but they did it anyway. Why? Because we know from psychoanalysis, those with the forms of psychosis that those at the top have, and they all have various forms of psychosis, the common thread is a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves.
That is psychopathy. That is exactly true. Let me tell you one thing. One of the quotes that I want to say exactly was Marshall McLuhan said, only the small secrets need to be protected. The big ones are kept secret by public incredulity. When you throw something at somebody that is so inane, so huge as what you've suggested, it is because of that heft that they're unable to handle it. So it's the easiest thing to keep secret. The idea, this is so interesting, going back, I don't want to poo-poo carbon change, but I've suggested that, that climate change and global warming, the anthropogenic man-made causation model that people are promoting was not in any way devised or disseminated to make the world better, but to provide the vehicle by which carbon taxing, track and tax, cap and trade, our carbon footprint could be taxed, were carbon exchanges. That was their motivation. What I'd like to do is say, wait a minute, Ocasio-Cortez, or whoever you are, I want you to go with your anthropogenic theory, but I want to twist it a little bit. You're onto something, but for the wrong reasons. There are man-made changes. There are anthropogenic, man-made causes changing this, but it's not your exhaust pipe necessarily. It's not a factory. It's not somebody who's deindustrialized, somebody who's with post-feudal world. It's something else, and all you have to do is look up. This is the gravamen. You don't have to read anything. Just look. How can we explain that something in plain sight, Plane, is nobody anywhere is looking up. That we are so interested about the snail dart and polar bears and icebergs, which are now ice cubes, and we can't just go a little bit, because that's not part of the script. And all you have to do, I don't have to go to Antarctica, just look up. I just gave about 20 different things, but you're right though. It's a psychological dynamic. It's disaster avoidance. It's incredulity. It's this forced inability to fake things. And by the way, since man, look at the savagery of us since the time we came out of the organic slime. It's in our nature to be savage, destructive, murderous, rapacious. There's really nothing deep to this. We could ask, why wouldn't man want to do this? I'm sorry for that, Bent.
Your very last question I want to address. People ask, why would they want to do this? And your statement is exactly right. Why wouldn't they want to use weather as a weapon? Of course they would. It's the crown jewel of the military-industrial complex. They can, again, topple a country without that country ever knowing they went to war. In regards to people like Cortez or all the environmental groups, again, the hypocrisy is immense. For the record, there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering factor, period. Any discussion without that factor is not a legitimate discussion. Any discussion of climate engineering is not legitimate without including the engineered cool downs that are occurring in specific places around the globe. Beyond that, we have to remember and consider that any form of human activity, this is very simple, I want your listeners to comprehend this because it's not a this or that equation. Any and every form of human activity that affects the energy balance of the planet is a form of climate engineering. It's tilting the scale in a certain direction. So all of those factors, and there are countless factors, are a part of the equation. But this being said, again, the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat is still climate engineering because it is disabling the planet's ability to respond to the damage being done. We must address climate engineering first and foremost. In the attempt to censor this issue, since my last exchange with you, Google has completely deleted geoengineeringwatch.org from a search of the geoengineering term. Because we've had nearly 33 million visitors at our site, our rankings put us at the top of the list for a search of the geoengineering term. We are still the top of the list in other search engines, Bing, DuckDuckGo, so forth. But 5 months ago, Google completely deleted geoengineeringwatch.org from 20 pages on the subject if you search the geoengineering term. You can still find our website if you search the exact name of our site, but not under the geoengineering term, which is where we are most effective. At the top of the list saying, exposing the climate engineering cover-up. They couldn't have that there, so they deleted us. So the censorship is absolutely ongoing. In regard to proving that this is going on, Lionel, we have had academia continually try to insinuate that the lab testing from ground level reflected ground level contamination. We have now disproved that. At great effort and expense, we have recently completed high altitude testing in specialized aircraft that's actually used by NOAA. And we have collected and confirmed. We have collected climate engineering particulate samples, the same elements used named in the patents. We have now confirmed that at altitude, thus eliminating the false accusation from academia that we are picking up surface contamination. We know this is coming from aircraft, period, end of story. We are working on a documentary to present this data. We've already interviewed Air Force generals, 2 of them. We have a former Bush cabinet member that we have interviewed. We have now contact with a former Canadian Minister of Defense. We will present once and for all data to confirm that these operations are ongoing, and the threat that is posed by this, and I want to drive this home to your listeners. They can choose not to believe this. I'm only asking them to investigate the facts that necessitate this conclusion. If we do not change course completely, if we do not expose and halt climate engineering as the first and foremost leap forward, we will not be here much longer. And back to the why part again. The feedback mechanisms I mentioned, like the methane that's thawing and releasing, migrating into the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of glass, with climate engineering making that scenario far worse overall, not better. In the attempt to hide it, they're making it worse. But these processes are now completely out of control, pushing us on a track toward what's known as Venus syndrome, and that is not a metaphor. Venus, all things being equal, the temperature would have been about 20 to 25 degrees higher than Earth's pre-industrial baseline. Venus is 900 degrees on the surface because it underwent a runaway greenhouse effect, which climate engineering is, again, further fueling, destroying the ozone layer, disrupting the hydrological cycle. So when you look at this through the lens of the military-industrial complex, it's not about to let go of their power. Their attempt to mask what's unfolding from the populations, to keep them from panicking, to keep business as usual. You have to look at this through their lens. They only look at the short-term objective. They never consider the consequences, as you correctly stated as well earlier. So what we have to understand is we are fighting for life. We will not be here much longer, and I'm not referring to centuries out or even decades out. Mathematically speaking, collapse is already occurring. We're seeing crop collapse, Australia, U.S. now, and this is back to what you stated earlier. When you keep the population mired in struggle, especially when there's not enough food on the store shelf, that's what they're concerned about, their next bite of food.
It's funny you say that. You know, one of the beliefs that I have is when people talk about the bigs, Dane, like what is it? What's the biggest group? Is it the mafia? Is it big pharma? It's big agra. What if I said, guess what I've got a patent to? The first geoengineering proof soybean. What if I could say crops gone, but this interesting little, let's just assume, and I'm not going to mention any companies, but if people don't understand the profit motive to that one, they don't see that. They also should ask the question, okay, all right, Dane, what do I do? All right, you pissed me off, you scared me. What do I do? Okay, I got your site, geoengineeringwatch.org. Great. What? What can I do?
Let me back into that first about the disaster capitalism, which you just mentioned. And certainly that's a part of this equation. Monsanto has aluminum-resistant seeds. They have patented aluminum-resistant seeds.
Now, why would they have, of all the elements in the periodic table, why would they happen to have? It's funny, remember, and you would think that with all this glyphosate, with all the glyphosate litigation now, $2 billion at one court only, you would think they would say, we got to back off this. Imagine what the Bayer company thinks, like, we bought what? Anyway, proceed. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh.
So I'm confirming what you stated, though. We have disaster capitalism going on, but I think it's imperative for people to remember that this disaster capitalism, whatever other agendas are being carried out, whoever's trying to line their pockets through these events as they're unfolding, is not going to get far. I would equate this to an example I've given in the past of this would be like pirates loading their pockets with loot as the ship is sinking, and they will sink with it. Whatever profit they may have in the meantime will very soon mean absolutely nothing. And the time horizons I cannot stress, it's unfolding right now. We have food rationing occurring in Cuba right now. When civilization can no longer produce and store enough of the staple foods to sustain itself, collapse will ensue with blinding speed, and that is already unfolding. What people can do, we are not helpless, and again, those in power are not gods. We must bring this issue to light, and if we can bring it to light, we will have an army of the awakened on our side, people, attorneys like we already have. We have scientists helping us now because they know the ship is going down and they are on that ship. So we can change the equation in raising this army of the awakened. We would have, again, in every arena, in every country, we would have people fighting to expose and halt this issue. And more importantly, Lionel, we would have people within the military, some of which we're already communicating with now, that realize by participating in these systems, they are literally killing their own families, their own futures.
So what do
with
we
us.
do? So right now somebody says, okay, Dane, I've got a pen. I'm going to write something. What do I do? Whom do I call? What do I do?
The best way to awaken people to this issue is to share credible data. Going out in the street, pointing at the sky and going into a diatribe is not effective. It shuts people down. So if you share credible data, and we offer links at GeoEngineeringWatch.org you can share from your own home computer. We have a 20-page fact and photo summary booklet. I think I've sent you some of those.
Oh, yes.
So those are extraordinarily effective because they show satellite imagery that is inarguable. It is massive climate engineering that's very recognizable to even those who don't know anything about meteorology. It's very shocking data in there, and it wakes people up to this issue. We need people to share with others. And as they share with others, within that circle and they ask others to do the same, we start to reach military families, we start to reach attorneys, we start to reach agency officials, so that at a certain point the equation tilts in the other direction, and we can stop these programs from the inside out by waking up the military members that don't understand they've been lied to about what these programs are about and the lethality of these programs. Just like the pilot who sprayed Agent Orange in Vietnam wasn't told, hey, this is going to kill your comrade on the ground. He wasn't told that. Or the people detonating the nuclear bomb weren't told that your friends that are going to view this are all going to die. We need to wake the military up to the fact that they are being used for mercenaries for an empire that is completely out of control. And this is not to condone any other country either, Lionel. I mean, we know countries, governments are all corrupt, but the fact of the matter is right now, the biggest, most dangerous entity is the largest military force, U.S. military force, bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. So if we can wake those up on the inside so that they stop cooperating and we all realize we must change direction or we are, in effect, going to reach planetary omnicide very soon. And we can do that, again, by raising a critical mass of awareness. We have full activist instructions on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, materials, everything's there to arm people with what they need to wake others.
And we also have, it's been suggested, has it not, or maybe you have, that there have been dupes, hapless, innocent, if you will, pilots who've had these additives or whatever put into their fuel systems, and they're spraying inadvertently. I've had this one. Somebody told me, you don't understand. I've been a mechanic or an airline tech for whatever, and if I was adding it or if it was there, we would have known about it. I love that. It's like, I don't think people would necessarily announce it. Is that true? That some people inadvertently were spraying these particulates without knowing it?
Absolutely true. We have never insinuated that any commercial personnel are directly involved with these programs, but their aircraft are absolutely being used, and we're not speculating or hypothesizing on that. We have film footage of commercial aircraft with nozzles visible turning on and off, and these are automated systems. They don't involve the pilots pushing buttons in the cab. We're not insinuating anybody in the commercial industry, and we are communicating with some commercial pilots, by the way, who absolutely know this is going on, discuss the issue with us. They're leaving our booklets in pilot lunchrooms and so forth to try not to lose their jobs while they introduce this issue. We have commercial carriers being subsidized in many different ways to keep those aircraft flying because those aircraft are being used for these programs, and it grants plausible deniability that, hey, if this isn't just military planes leaving these trails, it's commercial aircraft too, and that gives them some sort of plausible deniability. But between the fuel additives and the automated dispersions, which would not involve commercial pilots, we don't believe any commercial personnel are involved. But we have received letters from commercial mechanics, union mechanics. In one case, one fired because he wanted to know why he was not allowed to work on these systems. So again, this is a massive elephant in the room. I don't think it can be hidden much longer because biosphere collapse is accelerating so rapidly. And I would challenge people again, don't believe anything I'm stating, just research the data.
Right.
And in regards to the true state of meltdown on the climate, if you will, again, all these factors involved with climate engineering being a major factor at the top of the list. A film called Chasing Ice is well worth watching. It can be viewed online for, I think, $2.99. It's film footage from the front lines of the cryosphere, the ice deposits, non-political. If people don't believe what they can see with their own eyes, there's nothing we can do. But that being said, again, when it comes to Al Gore, when it comes to carbon credit shams, and that's what they are, sham, that's simply a means of polarizing populations or reaping profit off what's happening while ignoring the true magnitude of what's unfolding, what we need to do about it. So I'm with you on all those points.
It's also crisis profiteering. And what's interesting is that you would enter the room and say, climate changers, ice melting, I want to join your ranks, yes. But I have a different hypothesis as to the vehicle for such. And instead of saying, you know what, who cares, join the fray. Because what we're saying is we all can have commonality. See, I've never said for a suggestion or for a moment that I believe in poisoning rivers or ruining the. I don't know what that means. I've heard people though who are mindless dupes from carbon exchange, asset stripping jackals and Wall Streeters who were basically used as bait. But we all can agree. But the methodology and the source of it and the vehicles for this particular climate change, that's what we're arguing about. So it's a way of maybe luring people into the into the fray, so to speak. And once they're in, say, now, I'd like to go a little bit different. You know what I'm saying? Now, I got to ask this one question. Has it ever been possible where if I said, all right, Dane, I got it. You see that plane? I'm going to hop in my jet. We're going to follow that. We're going to follow, and when he lands, we're going to say, hey, what are you spraying there? Do we know who these people are? Do they turn transponders off? Where do they take off? Where do they land? Has anybody said, follow that plane? Has that ever been done, or am I just out of my mind?
It's more difficult than it sounds. Military tankers have their transponders off in many cases. With Flight Tracker, yes, we can track aircraft back to their sources, but again, there are so many sources, locations from military bases, which we have observers in the area that see fleets of KC-10 tankers leaving and returning every day that are obviously a part of these operations as well. But there are so many sources for these dispersions that that's a big list. But the fact that we have confirmed at altitude now with our testing that's taken a long time to get done with very highly credentialed scientists, very specialized aircraft, and again, we'll publish more on our results on the testing soon. A lot more details I'm not at liberty to give right now, but we bottom line confirmed that the contamination is at altitude. It means it's not a ground source, matches climate engineering patents, which is the end of the argument. Film footage of spray dispersions, contaminants presence. I mean, we have enough to build a solid case. Back to the entering the room of, if I could elaborate on that one point. We're entering a room of global warming activists or whatever setting like that. I mean, the way to approach those people is we certainly recognize the planet is warming very rapidly. And if you're in the lower 48, for all the reasons I mentioned, you might not see that as clearly. Look at the bigger picture. But back to what I stated earlier, we can't have a legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost addressing climate engineering. That is not to ignore the rest of sources of damage to the planet. We've been bad stewards for our planet, and there's no question about that. We have not treated the planet very well. But the single greatest assault against the planet, the climate, and the biosphere as a whole, mathematically speaking, is climate engineering.
Dane Wigington, last question, I'm sorry. What does this cost a year to put all of this out, the particulates? I mean, somebody's footing the bill for this, a lot of people. We're talking billions of dollars of spraying every single day. Now, is this all over the world? Is there any part of the world that is not susceptible to this? Are there any areas that you're aware of that are not? And are you aware of areas that are sprayed the most?
Areas that have the most moisture migration, like the Pacific Northwest, that's where that moisture is seated most heavily. And some of the spraying in those areas, because of the atmospheric rivers that enter those areas, are, again, a desired scenario for seeding. They get hit harder. Are there countries that are not participating? Yes, Iran is one. Now, again, the sights are on Iran for many reasons right now, for the oil resource, for the lack of willingness to participate in the dollar as the global reserve currency. But Iran has stated on film, on the record, on the floor of the UN, that their country was being droughted out, the precipitation being cut off by NATO weather modification programs, and they're exactly right. So this has been admitted by the leaders of countries, and Iran is only one of the target countries. All the countries that were named after 9/11 were all subjected to a once in 1,000 year drought. That's not nature. That's climate engineering cutting off their precipitation to, as you correctly stated earlier in the broadcast or in this exchange, to create chaos in their countries. And that's exactly what it did, made them much easier to destabilize and topple. In regard to the cost, back to what I stated earlier in the broadcast, those who print the money can control militaries and control countries. When we know that the Pentagon is missing from 21 to 30 trillion dollars with a T.
Remember the day before 9/11? Remember Rumsfeld, who
Correct.
was and then lo and behold, and I'm not getting anything with that, but I'm just saying, that's interesting. The timing is exquisite. Well,
Yes.
Dane Wigington, let me just say, I want to thank you. This is my poor wife, my beloved wife. We're driving along. I'm like, there it is. He goes, oh my God, keep your eye on the road. And I wanted this past. I've never seen. It was this past weekend, and when it's not over New Jersey, it's the Northeast. I don't know how high these things are, but I could even see the dip. I could see the the contour, the curve of the trail, meaning it was hitting the curvature of the flat earthers notwithstanding. And I thought the enormity of this is beyond, and people are just driving around, and I'm saying, how can you miss this? You know what we always talk about 9/11 is funny. And I was here in New York on that day. It was so blue. Everybody talks about what a beautiful day it was. Strange how so horrible a day that was. A day of horror. But Dane, I've never since seen the sky. It was gorgeous. It's gone. It's gone. And when I look out, we have a southern exposure, and I look out over the Hudson, and I can see New Jersey. And at night, when the sun kind of gets that kind of weird orangey, the pastel, you can see these hashtag thatched I know that there's, we have airports in Newark and LaGuardia and Kennedy, but they're not going back and forth. And again, it's right there. I see it, and and you must be. I mean, I'm a novice. You must be thinking, what am I doing? Does anybody care what I'm saying? Does anybody do this? In fact, you were the one who started off. You were just a regular folk who had your solar collection panel. You had something, hey, I'm gonna live off the grid or whatever, and you realize, I'm not getting any sun. What's going on here? Innocent you. What's happening? And then somebody said, I'm going to analyze my groundwater, my pools. Wait a minute. This is aluminum. And that's how it all started for so many people. So anyway,
You're correct. And when I first submitted my first precipitation sample to the state certified lab, I did not want to find the primary elements named in climate engineering patents, starting with aluminum, barium, strontium. I did not want to find those because I knew it would change the entire course of my life 15 years ago, and that's exactly what it did. And as I continued to test my precipitation, that level of contaminant in my samples went up. In the course of the next 18 months, it went up nearly 50,000%, from 7 parts per billion to 3,450 parts per billion. That's highly toxic rain. It's killing soil microbes. It's changing soil pHs. It's killing everything. It's destroying the ozone layer. Again, this is the gravity of this issue. The degree to which it is affecting our common future is absolutely incomprehensible. We must deal with this issue, and that's why I'm focused on this issue. It's not something I wanted to do. It's simply the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, and if we don't plug it, the boat's going down, period.
I want to thank you. It is so incredible. I want to thank you for your perseverance and your fortitude and devoting yourself to this. And I'm telling you, if there is indeed a God, if there is canonization and beatification, one day we will see Saint Dane. You will be the great Dane. You will elevated because, thank God, because of the internets, as they say, and others were able to spread the word. And let me tell you something. Everybody in my group, in my conspiratorium, in my clerisy, all of them love you. They love you. And they're so into it. Let me tell you something. I don't see Bill Maher banging your door down, begging you to come, or CNN. I don't think Wolf Blitzer or Rachel Maddow or any of the lefties worried about their environment, begging you to come on their show. But you've got a constituency, Dane, the likes of which you cannot imagine. And they're there, and they've been quiet, but we're going to get to them, and we're going to win this. And you are at the tip of the spear, my friend, and I thank you. Thank you immensely as a world citizen. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lionel. And I'm only trying to do my part, do what any decent man, father, husband would do. I'm just trying to man my post. It's a team effort, and I'm very, very grateful.
You're it. Well, GeoEngineeringWatch.org. I will have all the information there. Dane, thank you so much. We will talk again, sir, and keep up the great work. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel.